Today we're going to talk about referees in the United States. What is a referee? A referee is a judge that makes a final call on the racetrack, that pretty much whatever that referee says goes. So if you're a rider and you disagree with the referee, it pretty much doesn't matter because the referee does have the final say-so of that particular call. And I've noticed that the best referees are the ones that do not have a conflict of interest. Whether they have friends that are racing or they have family members that are racing, it's very difficult to be fair and impartial when you have your family that races Speedway and you're making a call in that same race. So it's kind of difficult. Also, it's difficult to be a good referee, I think, is to never race Speedway. I've noticed that a lot of the good referees have experience of being on a Speedway bike, being on the other side of a call. Sometimes they're good calls, sometimes they're bad calls, but it's a call. And I've noticed that some of the best referees in Speedway are the referees that have experience racing Speedway and knowing what it's like to be on the wrong side of a call. So I think that's where a lot of the better referees in American Speedway have come from. They've come from being racers before. And some of the good referees in the past was Irwin Moon. He was like a grandfather image, and he was well respected. I believe he refereed the World Championship and the National Championship at the Los Angeles Coliseum. And his son, Phil Moon, was a Division I rider. They both have experience racing Speedway. And then you had the animal, Jim Fishbeck. He was probably a good referee. I never experienced him myself as a rider. And I can imagine that he was a good referee because Fishbeck was kind of hard to muscle around. And I'm sure he had good judgment of what was right and what was wrong on the track. Although I never experienced myself his calls or anything like that. But I think he refereed for a few years. And the most recent referee, who I think is one of the best referees I've experienced, is the current referee in Speedway, and that's Steve Lucero. Now, Steve was a United States Speedway champion in the 80s, and he was a tough guy, much like Jim Fishbeck. That's kind of what you need to be a good referee. You need to be kind of hard-nosed and tough. But Lucero, I believe, is fair. Now, I've seen some of the riders who don't like his calls and complain, but I think every referee, you're going to find riders that don't like their calls, so that's probably nothing new. But I had experiences with Lucero racing him in Division I back in the 90s, and I made Lucero really mad, and I cut him off. It was a semi-main, and for the transfer spot, we were both running third and fourth place, and I cut him off, and he didn't transfer to the handicap main. And I made a dirty move on Lucero, and Lucero came yelling at me at the pits, and I thought he was going to kill me, and he was so mad. And I just told Steve, like, cool down, it's all right, like, chill out. And he was pissed. So when I saw Steve Lucero, when I came back in racing Speedway again, I thought, oh no, he's going to like make bad calls against me. Maybe he remembered that, but he did not remember that because he had so many experiences. But Steve Lucero has always made proper calls that I experienced as a Speedway rider and as a fan. And I think Steve Lucero is fair. I don't have a good experience with the other referees as much, but I think Steve Lucero definitely is one of the better referees that we have in Speedway. And I just see a lot of his knowledge as a speedway rider and his sort of being able to put things together in fairness. I see Steve Lucero that way, and having that racing experience as a speedway rider and United States champion definitely has helped Steve a lot in his judgment as a referee and understanding the rider's part too. So maybe he has a little flexibility of understanding for the racers as well. But I just have always had a good experience with Steve Lucero when I was racing, and he just started refereeing at the time, and he was always a good guy. You know, Steve Lucero just seemed like a really down-to-earth person, and he seemed to just be like a fair, honest referee. So I definitely would consider Steve Lucero one of the better referees that the American Speedway has had, and he's a current referee. And at the Grand and at the Costa Mesa Speedway, Steve Lucero referees. And I think that those tracks are lucky to have Steve Lucero as a referee because of his experience, his knowledge, and his understanding of the sport of speedway. It really helps the racers, and it helps the whole program go well, because if there's a violation by a rider, it's probably a clear violation, and Steve Lucero has to call it that way. And I'm sure some riders are not happy, but if they had a clear violation, they should understand what happened, and you know, that they had a violation, whether they're kicked out of the race or they got penalized 10 or 20 yards on the line. It doesn't really matter, but I think that some of the best referees in Speedway now have been former racers. And I think a lot of these guys that refereed before, Fishback, Phil Moon, Irwin Moon, I'm probably missing somebody, but they kind of understood the rider's point of view and could relate as a Speedway rider what it's like to have the calls go for them and against them. But fairness is always number one. Not being biased is also important when you're a referee, because the referee holds so much power. And you know, Speedway racers, they take racing serious. We all take our racing serious, and we really get upset if the calls are bad, and we don't see it that way. So there's some good referees, and like I say, some of these guys that were Speedway racers, I think they have some of the best judgment in Speedway today. But that's it. Referees, the good referees, Lucero, Fishbeck, and the Moons. Maybe I'm missing somebody, but that's kind of it. And like I say, I think having that Speedway experience really helps people be good referees. So some of the promoters should definitely look into racers that have been there and done that, and that kind of understand what it's like to be a Speedway racer turning referee.